So, for this video, I'm going to be doing a channel update for the two main pieces of information that I want to convey about the season, and also provide a small channel update. Channel update is basically I finally have a job. Yay! Since the streaming schedule, as you notice, kind of dropped off going into December, it's gonna kind of stay that way, where it's kind of dropped off just because. I do have some games that I'm playing. I'm playing some Rogue Company with a friend of mine that takes up a bunch of my time, trying to level that and get better, as frustrating as that game is. Plus, I still have this as a main game, and then if I get too frustrated, I have my side games, like I have Madden, I have some of my indie games, you know, things of that nature. So, my schedule, when I am on, I'm kind of all over the place a little bit. So, if you're looking for more dedicated content, it's going to fall off a little bit more, especially while I get stabilized in a new job. Now, the point I wanted to make on the characters. So Season 2 came out, and for Season 2, the number one complaint that we had about the game that I feel really needed to be talked about the most was, what were they going to do to give us new content into the game? As you can see on the right of the screen, you have the Season of Blood, which introduced a lot of new stuff, and you have the Midwinter Blight, which also introduced some newer stuff. Now, for the Midwinter Blight itself, it's not actually very good. It doesn't really give you much besides a little bit of cosmetics. So when I talk about Midwinter Blight going on, I'm going to be talking about Abattoir of Zir. I'm going to break that down in a second. But what I want to do, I'm going to hop on my Bone Spear Necromancer real quick, and I want to explain, I'm going to use this to explain a few things. I'm going to come back to this menu, and I'm going to go back and do another character. But that's not the point. So let's talk about what they did with Season 2. Now, one of the things that they did with Season 2 that is fantastic, we asked for more endgame content, and we asked for more meaningful endgame content, and they delivered, but not to a degree that's going to please everybody. Because you have some people saying that they didn't add enough content, you have some people saying, yeah, it's a nice start, especially where the game was already. There's no one that's really going to be pleased. It's not enough content, obviously, because it does get incredibly repetitive. However, it's better than what we had before. So what did they introduce for new content? So for new content, you have bosses, new bosses that were introduced. So you have the Malignant Burrow, which is Varshan. You have, somewhere over here, you have Glacial Fissure, which requires you to clear Tier 30 Nightmare Dungeons, get Distilled Fear, make a Nightmare Sigil, pop it, go in, clear him out. You have the Halls of the Penitent for Gregor. Where's the other one? I don't know where Lord Zir's is. There's a Lord Zir dungeon, if I'm not mistaken. Where is it? I know Lord Zir has his own dungeon in Eternal Realm, not just Seasonal Realm. Not that Hazar, is it? No. What would it be? I think it's somewhere up in here. Where's that? Not there. It's not there. I don't know where Lord Zir is. Now that's kind of annoying me. I don't think it's on here. This is actually now, like, upsetting me. Ancient Seat within the Darkened Way. Oh! Okay. But I haven't fought Zir. So you go to Darkened Way, and he's in there. Okay. Okay, that's kind of cool. That's kind of cool. So that's not an unused map anymore, basically. That's interesting. Anyways, so you have those bosses right there. And those bosses enable you to summon in Gaping Crevasse. You now have Duria. So, what do all of these bosses do? So it's like, yeah, that you added 5 new bosses in the game. 2 of these bosses are solely in, if you look at Darkened Way and you look at Glacial Fissure, these bosses are kind of just there for you to have a challenge, go fight, and get some gear, because you can target farm off of them now, which is pretty good. They're not the important parts. One of the most common complaints from Season 1 was there was nothing to do besides just keep running Nightmare Dungeons. You do Nightmare Dungeons to complete Codex of Power, and along the way, that's pretty much the only endgame content that you had. People complained about this. So, the developers fixed this by tying endgame content to more than just Nightmare Dungeon. You don't just keep running Heathen's Keep Nightmare Dungeon over and 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 over again and call that the end game, where basically the most interesting thing you would have is a butcher. So now you actually have to do events. So as you do, now you actually have to do Trio Whispers. They buffed up gold gains on Trio Whispers, they buffed up loot gains on Trio Whispers, they buffed up experience gains on Trio Whispers. But Trio Whispers gets old pretty quickly. So why do you keep doing it? Well, you need the materials to summon Varshan. Okay, so that's another boss that we can target farm for gear. There's no real reason to run Varshan though, right? Besides that. Well, hold on. They also buffed up Helltides. There's no active Helltide, so I'm just going to use the PvP zone because it looks kind of red. If you don't like that, oh well. So, you have the PvP zone. Okay, great. So I go clear the I go clear Helltide, and I go, and, you know, I get Cinders, I get Chest of Mystery. Well, no, you don't. Now, instead of getting the Chest of Mystery, let's say this is a Chest of Mystery right here. Instead of going and grabbing the Chest of Mystery in the Helltide zone, now you have another option. You can go grab Chest of Living Steel. Chest of Living Steel is a material that you need in order to summon Gregor in Hall of the Penitent. And when you summon Gregor in the Hall of the Penitent, he and Varshan both drop materials you need, and those materials allow you to fight Duriel. Duriel is the big baddie. He is up there with Uber Lilith, supposedly, in terms of, like, you know, damage output and health and things of that nature. Not as lethal as Uber Lilith is, but still very much the most challenging boss in the game. Well, why do I want to keep farming him? He has guaranteed Uber unique drop rates. It's small, it's only 2%, but he is the only one in the game that is guaranteed to have a chance to drop an Uber unique, which means people could actually hardcore farm for pieces of gear. Now, this is going to lead to a later issue that I'm going to talk about. However, at least for right now, what they've done is they fixed overworld content. You're no longer sitting and spamming Nightmare Dungeons. It actually kind of works against the game. No longer are you going to sit here and do the same 2 or 3 Nightmare Dungeons over and over for endgame. Which means if you're a seasonal character, you are not upgrading your Paragon board and your Paragon glyphs as much as you potentially could be, just because of the fact that, you know, you're not in Nightmare Dungeons as much. And you'll see this on even my Eternal Realm characters, because most of my time is not spent in Nightmare Dungeons now. They are spent in the overworld, doing overworld content. So it becomes a problem now when you're trying to do Nightmare Dungeons. Nightmare Dungeons, you kind of struggle with juggling the balance of it. It's like, if there's a Helltide active, I do Helltide, and then I go to Nightmare Dungeons for level XP, a little bit better loot, and the Paragon experience, and then until the next Helltide comes up, kind of alternating back and forth between that. So it's a better usage of your time than just keep running Nightmare Dungeons until you need resources. Now, they had to fix the Helltides because you just simply couldn't get enough Living Steel out of the chest, and they did a great job fixing it, so I'm not going to talk about Helltide anymore. I think the patch was a little bit too, the fix on it was a little bit too late, but it's pretty consistent to get Living Steel, because as you can see, I have a tab that's basically just for body parts, that's for Living Steel, that has all these things. Another nice change that they did is that they have tied the highest level of item power, which is currently 925. I don't think I have a 925 on me right now. I don't think I have one at least on this character. I know I have a 925 somewhere. But, yeah, here we go. A 925 item power piece of gear. This piece of gear can be tied to specific events and bosses. They are tied now to world bosses. This means going to a world boss is a massive boon to lower level players and even higher level players, because they will always drop you the highest item power gear in the game, giving you massive advantages. Okay? If you look at what I have right here, this dropped, I believe this dropped from a Legion event. I don't think this dropped. This is a very good two-handed sword. This instantly increases the DPS of my character to an absurd degree. I'm now, you know, I go from being a level 70 character to being you know, basically a level 75, 76, 77, 78 character, basically instantly in terms of damage output, just because it's a high item power with good rolls on it. You see, I haven't had to change anything on this sword. This sword is absolutely perfect for my build. The main issue that you have is that now that's another thing that you've got to do. You've got to do world bosses as soon as they appear. You want to do Legion events as much as possible. As I'm talking, I'm tempted to go do this Legion event, but I'm not actually going to. So, they've given you extra content, but really they didn't give you that much, because, okay, so if you're farming Uber Duriel, what is the point of farming Uber Duriel? It's to get the Uber Uniques that he drops, obviously, which have a relatively low drop rate. One of the biggest complaints people have is the grind for materials, okay? So let's discuss that real quick. In order to fight Varshan at Tree of Whispers, you need to have one of each of the body parts. So you need to have one head, or one hand, one head, one heart, and one bone, or one femur. You need to have one of each of these. Now in the lower world tiers, you can farm out hands, heads, and femurs. So it's not too hard to get those materials. You can obviously just go down to a lower world tier, grind out an insane amount of Tree of Whispers content basically for free, and then come back up to your world tier. In your world tier, if you need hearts, you have to do that in this world tier. They only do it in world tier 4. Hearts aren't that bad to grind out. And because of the way they spawn, they'll spawn these little enemies that pop up, these grotesque, whatever you want to call them, I don't remember the correct term. They spawn them, you can kill them, they have better drop rates on hearts than the actual chests do. So, you actually have a lot of ways to increase your endgame content potential. So if you look at what I have right here, because of the lowest one that I have, the lowest one that I have is the heads, that's 39, okay? So I have 39 heads, which means I can make 39 Varshan runs. Varshan is guaranteed to drop one of the materials you need, and you need 2 materials, and you need 2 copies of that material. So if I run, let's say, just to make it easy, I run 40 Varshan runs, okay? 40 Varshan runs gives me enough material for 20 Duriel runs. And that's if I use all of my materials right here. Then you have Gregor. Gregor is different. Gregor, you have to go and do a Helltide. So let's say we go do a Helltide, okay? We're target farming living steel chests. Living steel chests drop either 3 or 5 living steel per chest. And then all of the other chests on the map drop you 1. Now, this is good because this means you can grab the 2 living steel chests. If you have perfect rolls on them, that's 2 Varshan runs, or 2 Gregor runs right there. And then you could actually spend your cinders opening shitty chests like, hey, cut out. Honey, stop. Like opening shitty chests, you know, like 75 chests for boots, or a 75 chest for a head. Even though you don't need the gear out of it, you're basically getting 1 cinder for free out of that. Or it's like 75 for 1 cinder, or 125 for 1 cinder, or 150 for 1 cinder. If you go for a chest of mysteries for the better loot and the better elixirs and the forgotten souls and things like that, okay, great. You're also getting a living steel with it. So let's say I'm able to get 15 living steel out of 1 Helltide. That means I get 3 Gregor runs. So then I go and run Gregor. Gregor drops 1 material I need, and you need 2, along with the 2 that Varshan drops, in order to do it. This means that I currently have enough living steel to do 10, 12. I have enough living steel for 12 Gregor runs right now. Which means, you cut that in half, I get 6 Duriel runs. Now the living steels are obviously the hardest one of the thing to do. Then you go over and you have 6 Duriel runs. Is what I have enough for. We run Duriel the 6 times with a 2% drop rate. I'm nowhere near the 50 that I need. So it's very time consuming and does force you to grind these events pretty much all the time in order to get it. Like, sure, I have enough Varshan, I have enough to do Varshan like crazy, but I don't have nearly enough for Gregor. Now, why do you keep running Duriel over and over again? This is going to lead me to the second point that I have. they introduced the Abattoir of Zir. I don't know where the Abattoir of Zir is located. Basically, you go, once you've completed your seasonal journey on the season side of things added some new broken powers, like the vampiric powers and things like that, that really help break the game. Because, you know, a great example is they introduced new uniques, like they introduced Tybalt's Will, and Tybalt's Will makes it so that when, you know, you become unstoppable, you get a massive boost in damage, and for 4 seconds afterwards. And then there's a vampiric power, Metamorphosis, where you dodge and it makes you unstoppable. So you basically have constant uptime on massive damage boosts. Seasonal characters right now are very much overpowered, and Eternal Realm characters aren't. This is why I do most of my testing, and this is why I do most of my reviews on Eternal Realm. If I do bug fixing, or bug testing and things of that nature, build testing, I do it on Eternal because you don't have these massive power creep spikes that break the game. Look at last season. The Barber Heart broke the game. Everybody and their cousin was running a Barber Heart in their amulet. And you look at the amulet and you go, well, you know, it's because of how broken it was. That's true. The problem is that every single build in the game became Barber or Bust, Barber or Bust. So the goal with the vampiric powers was to give you some diversity in your brokenness, and while they did that, Abattoir of Zir completely undid all the work they did. Now, why did I choose Bone Spear Necromancer? Alright, there's 3 combat changes that I need to mention off the bat that are incredibly important. Number 1, they finally fixed how resistances work. Before, nobody cared about resistances because they didn't work properly. Now, resistances matter, and resistances will kill you. And I'm going to explain that when I switch characters a little bit more. But for right now, you see this character, this is why this character performs so well, even though it's only level 73, is because I have maximum resistance on all of my gear. I'm just barely there, but I have maximum resistance on all my gear, and I hit like an absolute dump truck because of the fact that a world boss gave me a piece of gear that is end game gear. I'm essentially 20 levels ahead of where I should be. And that leads me to the second problem. Health and armor now matter much more because you just simply take so much more damage. Between resistances, between enemies dealing more damage, because you're constantly fighting enemies that are higher than your level, because of how armor scaling works now. So, like, me having 5,400 armor on this character does absolutely nothing for me for damage reduction, because all of the characters that I'm fighting are above my level. This essentially means my damage reduction is maybe 20%. That's why you have to have resistances max. And life plays an even bigger deal because you have to have that massive chunk of life in order to actually be able to tank hits. This is why a lot of characters, when they make the transition from World Tier 3 to World Tier 4, and even going from, if you're level 100, going to do things like Duriel, going to do things like Uber Lilith, when you're starting Abattoir of Zir, when you're doing level 100, Tier 100 Nightmare Dungeons, there's this massive jump because you simply don't have the health to survive these. They become DPS battles where it's like, can you one-shot it, or do you get one-shot? Now, the other combat change that I want to mention has to do with damage categories and damage buckets. They reworked damage buckets across the board. So, builds like Bone Spear were thought to be terrible because they are high damage builds that rely pretty much entirely on crit and vulnerable for extra pools of damage. Things like Overpower got a rework. So now Overpower does absurd amounts of damage, and especially with the focus on damage reduction and maximum health being much more prioritized, it makes Overpower even more powerful. However, and this is a big however, people thought that things like Bone Spear would be dead. No, they're not. They also did a nice job, by the way, of buffing damage over time effects. I want to mention that. Damage over time feels really good right now. Here's the major problem that you have to look at when you are looking at the various builds at your disposal now. The damage buckets don't really matter. If you're building crit or you're building vulnerable, it's still going to be good. Yes, they nerfed how a lot of it does. The major thing that you have to look at is in gearing, okay? So, if you're looking at something in a board, okay, you see how this is a multiplicative bonus because it has the little X next to it? This is much more valuable than something that is a plus, an additive bonus. And these bonuses count. So for example, this one right here is very interesting. The increased critical strike chance is actually just about worthless. It's 27%, which seems like a great amount, but it's additive. It's not multiplicative. The second half of it, you deal 54% multiplicative critical strike damage, is what is why this build is being run. That's why I'm running this aspect in the build, because that's multiplicative. And you'll see that if you look at your Paragon tree, right? Probably the easiest disparity that I can give you is between the difference between magic and rare. All of the magic ones, you would never use them, but all of the magic ones are additive, whereas the majority of the yellow ones are multiplicative. There are some that aren't really multiplicative, they're additive instead. Most of the bonuses are multiplicative, whereas the base ones are additive. Here's the thing though. That makes your builds, older build guides, obsolete. So if you look at something like Hulking Monstrosity here, that golem gets a massive bonus because they're multiplicative. Meaning, as soon as you grab this node, you might say, well, it's 100% increased damage, so I double my DPS. You're not just doubling the DPS on the golem, you're actually doing that 2.5 times, because you have to look at all the other bonuses you have that are additive are being added to the bonus before the multiplicative bonus. This, if it sounds confusing, look at it this way. My golem deals 100 damage, I have an additive bonus for it deals 50 damage. For an extra 50 damage. And then Hulking Monstrosity. It doesn't take into consideration the 50 damage ahead of time. So it's not like, you know, it's 150 and then double it so it's 300. It's taking the 100, multiplying that, and then adding the 50. So it's 250 instead of 300. It's a little less damage, but that's still a massive damage bonus. So it forces you to pick and choose what damage bonuses you want. Now, why am I mentioning this? Damage buckets in this game, getting reworks, have done some slight side effects. And the way they've decided to balance and or rebalance some builds has changed the dynamic completely. Before, when you were in the previous stage of the game, you didn't have to optimize any build whatsoever. You could have a singular build that is a meme build that runs like, let's say, 4 basic generating skills, okay? Let's say you're a barbarian. That's a pretty good example. Barbarian has some good basic generators, okay? Let's say you decide you want to run 4 basic generators and 2 shouts and just say, fuck it. You could make a build like that work. Now, take that build, throw it out the window. You look and say, well, obviously that makes sense. They're trying to make the game more serious and pushing endgame more. However, let's discuss this. Abattoir of Vir, in combination with the changes to resistances and damage reduction and damage buckets and life and armor and how all these things add up, have completely changed how the game works. Now, and this is the main reason why I'm making this video, now you're like 20 minutes in, is because you have to look at how builds have changed. So, of my builds, right here, this is an Ice Sorceress. This build is mid. It's not going to clear endgame Abattoir of Vir. It's not going to do it. It might get through some early levels. It's not pushing later levels. This is a Lightning Sorceress. Now, this is a Chain Lightning build, which is in the exact same boat here. It's going to clear low tiers of Abattoir, not high tier. Ball Lightning will clear everything. Ball Lightning becomes the only build that any Sorceress player runs because it is the only thing that clears endgame content reliably because of how everything synergizes. You have a very small amount of gear that you have to acquire for it. It's necessary to acquire it, but as soon as you acquire it, you essentially just win the game. You need 1 legendary aspect for Ball Lightning itself. You need 1 defensive one for Vir's Mastery for damage reduction, and you need some unstable current supports. Maybe if you want to get your mana regen up a little more, you have some Chain Lightning stuff in there as well, but you don't really need a lot. You just focus on defensive uniques. You don't even have to rely on Uber uniques, except maybe Melted Heart of Selig. I don't know if that's an Uber or not. I'd have to double check my list. But Ball Lightning just demolishes everything because it's high crit chance, you have 10 million balls circling around you per second, and you just obliterate absolutely everything. Okay? Fire Sorceress is bottom of the barrel. Still, it's better than it was before, but it's still bottom of the barrel. You're lucky if you get through the early stages of Abattoir of Zir. I'll come back to Barbarians. All of the Druids, with the exception of Werebear Druid, are garbage. They are lucky if they can get through lower levels of Abattoir of Zir. They do not have the damage output that you need for Zir. And the problem is, Zir changes how you play the game. Because in normal Nightmare dungeons, a tier 100 Nightmare dungeon, you're one-shotting absolutely everything. The issue is, how much damage can you take? If you get hit 1 or 2 times, you die. Especially on more fragile classes. Going into Abattoir of Zir, it feels the same way in the early game. This is why every build can probably clear a tier 1 Abattoir of Zir build now that they've buffed it to make it a little less punishing. Here's the problem, and this is the major problem. As you increase in scale, obviously you can't tank hits. You'll die in 1 hit. That's an intended game mechanic, though, because you are pushing the end game content where things are doing so much damage. You have to have this massive amount of armor. You have to have fully maxed out damage resistances. You have to have perfect rolls on damage reduction on gear. That's not the issue that we have. The issue now is the philosophy changes. Now you need to get even more attack power. Because what happens, what a lot of classes struggle with, is that they run out of time in Abattoir of Zir to actually kill things and beat it because they're on a timer. And the reason why is if you have most of your eggs are in damage reduction, going, okay, my build can clear tier 100 Nightmare dungeons, and I one-shot everything. I one-shot Butchers, I one-shot Uber Lilith, I one-shot Duriel. I'm fine on damage, let me focus on damage reduction. You'll just breeze through Abattoir, and then when you reach the point where you can't one-shot shit in Abattoir of Zir, what happens? You start losing it. And you lose it a lot, and it forces you to change your build. Now, you have to find ways to get damage reduction to stay the same, while also getting more DPS, and it forces people into these really niche builds, where just about every build is unplayable. So, that's the thing. None of the Druids, outside of Werebear Druid, have the instant overpower burst to kill things in late game Abattoir. None of them do. They're more focused around things like crits, vulnerable, damage over time. It unfortunately becomes really stupid, because if you can't guarantee 95 billion critical hits per second with an absurd amount of crit damage, crit builds out the window. Overpower becomes better. That's why, like, Ball Lightning is like the one exception. So here's the state we're in. I don't have any rogues right now. The best rogue build is Poison Imbuement, and the best Poison Imbuement build I've seen get up is like tier 20. Tier 20 is as high as you can go. Most rogues drop off at about 10 to 15 range. So rogue's out the window for endgame content now. You look at Druid. Werebear Druid is the only build that I've seen that can get to a tier 20. Only one. Most Druid builds that I've seen drop off. The highest one I've seen behind is like 18. And then behind that is like 14 and lower. Or Druids just can't do it outside of Werebear. And it sucks because, okay, so this character right here and this character right here, if they introduced Abattoir of Zir to Eternal Realm, guess what happens to these characters? I can't play them. This is the only build, and that's if I min-max it to the extreme. This is the only build that gets any value. Now, Necromancer, Necromancer's in a relatively good place, right? Well, yes and no. The problem with Necromancer, it's inherently squishy, so you always have that that one-shot potential. Here's the problem. All of the Necromancer builds can clear low levels of Abattoir of Zir reliably. And as you start to move up, you see issues. So, massive Shadow Blight damage over time build, that can get a little bit higher. That can get you to 15, maybe 18. Minion build, stay in the 10 to 12 range. Stay in the 10, you're not getting up there. Bone Spear, you can get close to 20, you're not clearing it. Bloodlands, you can get close to 20, you're probably not clearing it. Blood Surge, you can get to about 15 to 18, you're not clearing it. Right? Just examples. You know, you have Cold Shadow. You can get close to 15 to 18, you're not clearing it. The problem with this is that to clear the endgame content, you now need to have the best of both worlds. Then we look at Sorceress. And again, none of the Sorceress builds besides Ball Lightning are capable of clearing it. None. Nada. Any fire, whether it's Fireball, whether it's Meteor, whether it's Damage Over Time Fire, they stay in the 5 to 10 range on Abattoir. Seriously. I have seen one Meteor build on PS4 that has cracked a tier 10. That's how bad fire is. But nobody's playing fire because Ball Lightning has been just so dominant the whole season. And if you look at Ice, Ice can get you a little higher. Ice might get you to 15. Might. Chain Lightning might get you to 15. Ball Lightning's the way to go. So, 90% of the players that you see that are playing Sorceress, especially on Seasonal, are only playing Ball Lightning. So the same problem that we had before, which caused them to change how damage buckets works, bit us in the butt again. Now here's the bigger issue. Barbarian has become the best class in the game. Barbarian has 2 reasons. Okay? Well, no, I'll say Barbarian has 3 reasons. Barbarian has 3 reasons. 1, reliable overpower procs. 2, Red Ring of Fury. 3, strength boosting armor. Now, what does this all mean? I'm going to load in, this is my weakest character. This is my weakest Barbarian character that I have. I do not like playing this character. I've actually stopped leveling it because of how ridiculous it is to actually play this character. This character as borderline sucks to play. And I'll explain why in a minute. If it ever wants to load. So, what you have on this character, the reason why this character sucks, by the way, is because of how bad my resistances are. Just to explain. I cannot clear a Nightmare Dungeon by myself on this character because of how bad my resistances are. So I'm overworld grinding to get some better gear, to get some better resistances. Just to explain, like, my best resistance is a 56, and I'm still getting almost one-shot by the majority of my gear. Just to explain things to you as to why this class suffers so much. Or why this particular build suffers. Because if you look at my stats, they're pretty good. I have 8100 armor. That is because Barbarian's main stat is strength. Strength increases armor directly. So just by being a Barbarian and building into strength naturally, I'm increasing my armor. Now you need 13,500 for the tier 100 Nightmare Dungeon cap on armor. That's the amount you need to hit in order to get damage reduction for that. So obviously I'm nowhere near maximum damage reduction, but I'm very much ahead of my damage reduction for where I should be at the time. And if you notice, I'm going to scroll down to armor here. So what this means is this armor is, it says it cannot reduce more than 85% of the incoming physical damage from a level 73 enemy, and then that drops off a cliff as I go higher and higher level. This is why I can clear higher level enemies, is because I have an insane amount of damage reduction. But if they're resistance based, if they're not physical based, immediately die. Because my resistances matter so much now. That's just explaining this character. This character's damage output is insane. I just don't simply have the survivability for it. I cannot survive in order to do the damage. Now, this is the second problem, is Red Ring of Fury. Red Ring of Fury is the ring. Whenever you spend 100 Fury within 3 seconds, your next cast of Hoda Upheaval Deathblow is a guaranteed crit and deals 30% multiplicative bonus crit damage. So, what this means is that if you run... This is kind of a build guide I'm throwing in. If you run Unbridled Rage, which doubles the Fury cost, okay? Now things like Upheaval cost 80, Hoda cost 70. meaning you just need to be able to get 2 of these out within 3 seconds. Or the backup option, which you can do if you're low enough. If you're low enough on your resource generation isn't quite there yet, is you can run Kick with the modifier where it spends all of your fury. And then you just have to build it back up. That takes much longer, that's less effective, that's part of the reason why this build isn't as good. You basically have guaranteed ways to get massive chunks of damage, massive upheaval damage, massive Hoda damage, massive death blow damage. And all of these have ways of being increased. Upheaval has Hellhammer to increase it, Death Blow has Overkill to buff it, Hoda has the legendary aspect that buffs it. There's the weapon charge one where you spend 100 fury, your next weapon charge deals multiplicative bonus damage that you can stack on Death Blow. Excuse me. These 3 builds have single-handedly taken over the game, Barbarian. So the combination of Barbarians having the sustain because of armor, they only have to focus really on getting resistances, because you can get things like, you know, total armor percentage in your gear in addition to resistances. Like, as an example, on this chest piece right here, I would have loved the ability to roll off that physical damage for resistance. You know, on my head right here, it has 3 resistances on it that I absolutely need. I can't take it off. You know, if you look at pants, I have a resistance on there. I would actually love to take that damage reduction from close off just to have, or the all stat, just to have an extra resistance. Same thing with something like boots. There's plenty of examples where you want to have extra resistances that you have to find ways to get them in. Now, Red Ring has single-handedly taken over. It has good base stats too. Resource generation, attack speed, base stat. It has good stats going with it, so it's fantastic to run. Here's the major problem that you have, though. That's not enough to clear Abattoir. Look at your Paragon board now. Your Paragon board you have to have. You have Dominate. After not overpowering for 30 seconds, you get a guaranteed overpower, right? Look at something like Bone Breaker. Every 12 seconds, guaranteed overpower. Just these 2 skills alone give you, again, bonus crit pools. Then you have things, obviously, like Wrath for more crit damage with Red Ring. You know, there's some, like, Exploit for more vulnerable damage. There's just so much damage potential that you have in Barbarian. And the funny part is, if you look at Barbarian, if you look at builds, right? A basic bitch build can clear you a low Abattoir, like a 1 to a 5. You're not getting higher than that on a basic bitch build. Well, if you're trying to run Battle Trance Frenzy, ain't happening. Shoe off. Whirlwind can clear 25s. It's a bit more difficult than you think, but can clear 25s. Hoda clears 25. Upheaval clears 25. Double Swing. Don't be ridiculous. Go back down to tier 100 Nightmare Dungeons, you fucking scrub. Double Swing is still fucking terrible. I don't know what they're going to do to buff that. They kind of don't need to, though, because the rest of... Why would you play it? Rend. The bleed build can get to about a 10. Maybe a 15. AFK, which is Bleed and Thorns comboing, that can get you through 25. Multi-shouts are also needed in every single Abattoir build. You have no choice but to run all the shouts. You have to run Rallying Cry. You have to run Challenging Shout. You have to run War Cry. I don't like running all the challenges. Too bad. Fuck you. Stay out of endgame content. Same thing. You need Iron Skin every single build. I don't like Iron Skin. I think it's a bad defensive skill. Too bad. Fuck you. You need it. So, the problem with Abattoir builds is they change how you play because, okay, so I now have to run 4 skills, and I only get 2 skills to run, one of which has to be a damage-dealing skill, like an Upheaval or a Hoda, and one of them has to be a resource generator. Like, you know, a Lunge or a Frenzy or a Bash. The problem that they've done, they did all of this endgame content, and they said, this is what we want you to do. It's great. They gave us what we asked for. The problem is they also cynically said, yes, but now you're going to play the game our way. That's something that they need to fix going into Season 3. They have to be able to make, because they did the changes to damage buckets beforehand. And at the start of the season, some builds like Vulnerable Whirlwind, you felt how bad Vulnerable Whirlwind was. Until people were trying to take Whirlwind into Abattoir, theory crafting, and came up with some broken builds for it. You know, looking at something like Upheaval. Upheaval before was good, but it wasn't great. Red Ring broke it. The Buff to Furious Upheaval helped break it some more. The random overpower procs, the bonus crit procs. They kind of broke their own builds. And now they're like, well, nobody's playing this build. Yeah, because there's only 5 builds in the game that can clear the content you set forth. So the thing for me is they need to find a way to either... They need to decide, for one, balance-wise, do you want every class to be broken, and that's how we balance things out, or do you want to make every class balanced? So what you do is you buff the weaker builds and nerf the stronger builds. People don't like that approach, but they don't want every single build in the game to be broken. Cynically speaking, the shop is terrible, by the way. The shop is still terrible. There's nothing worth buying in the shop. I see people spending money all the time. It is absolutely ridiculous. It's not up here anymore, I don't think. Let me see. Oh, wow, I can actually grab this. Thanks.
It stirs you, yes?
Thanks. I guess.
It calls to
I'm not gonna complain about free cosmetic, but... Right? So... I wonder if it's still here. I'm just checking something. No, it's not here anymore. The Lich King. Oh. Okay, damn. Oh, wow. Oh, okay.
A powerful calling. It calls to you.
No, not included in the bundle. That's fine. Anyways. That's not my point, game. Stop. Stop throwing through free shit at me. I'm not spending money on you. Yeah, it's still not here. Yeah, it's still not here. Okay. Right, it was the Lich King horse. That was it. That was the only thing in the shop. If they want to, I have the fear that they're gonna start selling shit off to the player base and saying, hey, you know, you want extra stash tabs? You want extra character slots? You want, you know, boons and buffs for better gear? They're gonna start selling that stuff. They want to talk about there's no pay to win. I don't think they're gonna add pay to win. I really don't. I think they're gonna add pay to convenience, which, to be fair, I actually wouldn't be opposed to that. It sucks, you know. If they do something like, you know, say, hey, do you want to have more character slots so you can have more mules? Or if they add a season pass converter where, like, you can take a character that's an Eternal Realm character and you can transfer them over to seasonal. Like, let's say you take, you know, a level 100 Necromancer, and you can take them over to seasonal, but you can't bring over any of the gear or anything with them. They start completely fresh. And what they do is they just give you a set of, like, you know, say, yellows across the board. They just give you yellows across the board and say, go find your own fucking gear. Something like that. They charge you $5 for a pass like that. I don't know how many people are actually going to be willing to do that. So...